Hello everyone. Today, while you watch this speed pastel painting of my own little dog, Pocket, and part of my husband too, that I did for our holiday greeting card, I'd like to talk to you about how to choose a good reference photo for your composition. Now, obviously, these tips vary a little depending on whether or not the piece is a commission for a client or something of your own, but most will apply to both. In order to get a good likeness, you need a good reference photo. You might think this is just plain common sense, but you'd be surprised how many photos I've received from potential customers that were completely unrecognizable. Recently, I poured through hundreds of photos of a pet for a customer in order to find one that worked. This included photos that were dark or blurry, or even some where the animal's back was completely turned away, which for obvious reasons is not going to work. Here are some things to look for in a good reference photo. Tip number 1. Your photo should be high resolution. When you zoom in on any part of the photo, you should be able to see fine details like individual hairs, eyes, and nose. You know that old statement that the eyes are the windows to the soul? Keep this in mind when choosing a good reference photo because the eyes are an extremely important part of any portrait you do. In fact, I consider them the most important part of any portrait that I do. You have to be able to see both eyes clearly, and if you zoom in on the eye in the photo, you should be able to see the color variations and the reflections well. Check that the focus and resolution of the photo, especially the main part of the subject, are in sharp focus so you can pick out the details you'll need. You want a photo that is higher resolution than your ending artwork will be. On a personal note, unless the subject in question is deceased and the customer is giving me a lot of license to fill in the details I can't make out in the photo, I will usually not work from a photo that isn't high resolution and in sharp focus. Tip number 2. Even if a photo is high resolution and in focus, it should also have good lighting. Outdoor lighting is best, preferably on an overcast day, but sometimes sunshine works too. Poor lighting can result in an inability to see detail as well as values, correct coloring, and facial expression. Don't think a flash photo will help in an indoor dim space. This will often cause red or green eye and can completely overexpose your photo. If your photo is overexposed with too much light, there will be blank white patches on the subject that show no detail at all. Underexposed photos, on the other hand, will have the opposite problem, without enough light, resulting in blobs of dark black areas that you can't see. Pay close attention to the lightest and darkest areas of a potential reference photo. Can you still see details in those areas? If not, while the contrast in lighting might make a great photograph, it is unlikely to be a good candidate for a portrait reference. Even a photo that you might find on a free site like Pixabay will need to be examined because those photos are often manipulated to be brighter and have higher contrast, which might wash out detailed areas. Remember, dogs, cats, horses, and other animals, including people, have a lot of details in their eyes and noses alone, with color variations, bumps, ridges, etc. If the photo is over or underexposed, you won't see those details. On to tip number 3. Consider the angle at which the photo is taken, as well as the crop of the photo and the pose. Photos that you take down at the subject's level are almost always better for a portrait than those that have been taken looking down onto the animal from above. A few things to look at regarding the pose. First, think a lot about whether or not the pose is flattering to your subject. If it is a commission, check with your customer before continuing. Once, I was commissioned to do a graphic pencil portrait of a woman's mother along with the lady's 3 best friends. They were all arm in arm. I thought it was a fantastic photo full of love and camaraderie, and I was looking forward to doing it. I was new to commissions at the time, so I didn't think to remind the woman that she would get a fully realistic piece of that photo, and she needed to make sure it was a flattering representation of her mother. I did all 4 faces exactly as they were in the photo. I was really excited to show the woman when she came to pick it up, but she looked shocked and said, "That doesn't look like my mom. It's a terrible picture." I was very taken aback and laid the photo next to the drawing. I asked what's different about the photo and the drawing. She couldn't find a fault, but she wasn't happy about it. I hated that she was disappointed, but I had drawn the picture by the exact image she gave me, and not as she saw her mother. Since that time, I have warned customers that I can only draw or paint what I see, so they need to examine their potential reference photo and make sure it is a good and flattering likeness. Also, consider the angle of the subject. Certain angles on a photo can distort the anatomy of your subject. In a very few cases, this can add to the charm of the piece. In a recent portrait I completed, the photo was a little dog poking his head through porch rails. The angle of the photo made the dog's head look huge, while his body behind the rails looked very small, almost like a caricature. In this case, it made for a very cute and charming portrait. Most of the time, though, the distortions caused by angle are not that flattering. For example, if you take a photo of an animal from above, the rest of the body is foreshortened and looks too small, or disappears behind the head of an animal. If you take a photo of a horse from an odd angle, it could look out of proportion and strange. This is why it's best to photograph an animal at eye level. Make sure the shape of the animal fits well within the dimensions of your surface size too. If you're doing an 8 by 10 inch piece, a full body shot is probably not going to be a good likeness unless the animal is a mouse or a rabbit or something else very small. Crop the photo and the subject in a way that it fits the piece. For example, an animal with very large ears that stick out to the side will need to have that taken into account so its ears don't run off the sides of the page. Remember too that mat boards are slightly smaller than the opening says, so if you're going to mat the piece, that's something to think about. For an example, an opening of 8 by 10 is really more like 7 3/4 and 9 3/4, so take that into account. Tip number 4, consider the background of the image. This isn't as important as steps 1 through 3 because you can choose to change the background or creatively move things around a little bit, but it can be important if the customer wants the background to be similar to the photo. For example, the photo might be of a dog outside in the grass in front of their barn, so your background might be important to the setting. Make sure that the subject is placed well in the setting or that you move bits of the background to accommodate the subject. For example, you don't want it to look like there's a tree trunk growing out of the subject's head, or a horizon line that runs behind the pet at an awkward angle and kind of looks like it's cutting it off. And finally, tip number 5. Make sure you choose a photo that represents the subject's personality best to you, or if it's a commission, to the customer. If the subject is normally goofy and funny, don't choose a serious formal photo. Recently, I did a commission of a mixed breed dog. I had 3 photos to work from.